Hello, everybody. Sorry for the delay. It's always an interesting task to get back onto Facebook Live, but we are ready for you now and welcome you to our Tosa Talks. My name is Robin Luther. I'm from Tosa Together. So I want to welcome you here to Tosa Talks, building a diverse, thriving community. We're an ongoing Facebook Live series proudly sponsored by our generous friends at Bostik. Tosa Talks features 3 monthly presentations designed to provide meaningful discussions around racial and social justice issues to support the work of building an inclusive, anti-racist community. We're excited for tonight's presentation with Emily Phillips on the impact of supporting Black-owned businesses and broadening your neighborhood experiences. This discussion is part of the Equity and Inclusion track that streams live at 7 p.m. or today at 7:20 p.m. on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Please also join us for the Personal Story track on the 2nd Tuesday and the Government Department and Organization track on the last Thursday of each month. Presentations are all recorded and available for viewing and sharing on this Facebook page or on the Tosa Together YouTube channel. I'd like to encourage you to take part in the live stream question and answer session tonight. Please add your questions for our speaker into the Facebook comment section during the presentation. And it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's host, Rebecca Salata.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Salata from Tosa Together, and I'm delighted to welcome tonight's presenter, Emily Phillips. Welcome, Emily, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Before we get started, I'd love to give our Facebook audience a little background about you and your work. Emily Phillips is a managing partner and financial advisor with the Drossner Phillips Ristau Group, a wealth management team at Baird. In addition to her day job, Emily is also actively involved in the business and nonprofit community. She serves on several business advisory and nonprofit boards. Emily is deeply committed to a variety of charities investing time and energy to the greater Milwaukee community. She loves to, in addition, she loves to skateboard, which I would love to see myself, play golf, compete in triathlons, and a variety of other sports. Emily was a speaker at the 2016 TEDx UW at Milwaukee I Am, We Are event. She received a 2017 Milwaukee Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award, the 2018 One Milwaukee Driver of Diversity Professional of the Year Award, and was one of the 2020 Women of Influence. Emily has also been one of Milwaukee Business Journal's power brokers for the last 4 years. Although the awards demonstrate her involvement in making the world a better place, the driving force in her quest for #world domination for good is her passion for people, especially the underdog. And with that, welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
So we wanted to talk tonight a lot about what we talked about a little bit in your intro, and that is I know that you personally have been involved in nonprofit work, but also some very for-profit work that has been investing in the community, and one of them being the Sherman Phoenix project. So if you could share a little bit about that background, what got you interested, and go from there.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I love Wauwatosa. I've lived there in my life prior to moving further west. When I went to UWM, I used to promise myself I'd never live farther west than the river. And then that slowly just kept creeping. And now I find myself even further west than Wauwatosa. So but I hope to get back someday. Pardon?
You didn't define which river, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a great lesson in clarification. I started at Baird in 2013. I was recruited here by my senior business partner, Donna Drossner, and she opened my eyes to the world of investments and the flow of money and finance. And though I was in management consulting prior and had a pretty astute understanding of what the world of investments looked like, I didn't understand all of the intricacies and sort of how things get funded, right? Just even in, public fundraising for schools, right? Bond issues and things like that. And so as I became more educated in the world of finance, and investing, I started wanting to marry my interest in making the world a better place with the world of finance. And as opportunities started to come around in the theme of impact investing and sort of environmental, social responsibility, corporate governance, and things like that nature, even when I first started at Baird back in 2013, they were a bit taboo and kind of seen as, only things that liberal people would invest in. And that's come a really long way as well. So my interest was piqued due to my job change from management consulting into finance. And after 2016, when the Sherman uprising occurred because of the police shooting, it really reminded me of my days in college and work on racial equity and justice in that nature. And as I started paying attention to what was happening there, the work of Julie Kaufman and Joanne Sabir and several other really intelligent individuals, I talked to my wife and I said, we do everything the conventional and traditional way. I'd really love to start expanding our own portfolio and start to look on how we can make our money work with a more social enterprise focus. I think a lot of times people are wired to think about their investing in a traditional manner, and then they separate what investing looks like with their nonprofit or philanthropic activity. And this was the first time where Angie and I got to sit down and really evaluate, what do we want? And not the first time we got to, the first time we really did, like, what do we want out of life and what do we stand for? And how do we continue to match our dollars with what's important to our core value system? And, if you're not familiar with the Sherman Phoenix and how it came about, the bank, BMO Bank, was burned down, not burned down, but it went through a fire. And so the bank had to decide, one, if they were going to pull out of the neighborhood, or if they were going to remodel and renovate the structure, or if they were going to build from scratch in a different location in the neighborhood. And ultimately, they retained their commitment to the community, which is fantastic. But they decided it was more beneficial for them to rebuild. As everyone knows, retail branches and things are consolidating and changing. They didn't need that large of a structure. So here sits this property that now needs to be reborn. And that's where Julie and Joanne come in. And they decided that, after many different conversations, they identified this need of this entrepreneurial hub. And so they went through the fundraising effort, and we were able to participate and become an investor in this building. They were able to not only renovate the space and create coaching and funding for all these businesses at a sub-market rate for these rents, but they also did all of that with far less money than a project probably many of you familiar with, the Milwaukee Public Market, which has, I think, maybe a third of the entrepreneurial vendor spaces as a places like Sherman Phoenix.
Really?
So that's where we got started in sort of where that journey existed, which then opened up my eyes to all the opportunities that could exist if we started thinking about economic viability and started thinking about the business case around equity, instead of thinking of it as, we're these really good white people who are trying to change the world and, provide benefits to people. And that, to me, that formula doesn't add up. It's more about, we recognize the inequities that exist in the system that, by the way, we're responsible for and created and designed for the benefit of us mostly. How do we recalibrate our thinking? And instead of going about it in a way that's philanthropic, really think about the business case that's attached to this, and how do we start putting our dollars into vehicles like the Sherman Phoenix and others.
So that really interests me because I've been to both. I didn't, the Sherman Phoenix is just, if you haven't been there, it is a really cool space. I remember the first time I went, I said, I think that was one of the first times I met you too. Just went in there. It's like, wow, this is such a cool space. So tell us a little bit more about that. You said that sounded like there was some training and some other things into it, more than just here's a building and here's where some people can open a business.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, you were talking about training, I thought you had mentioned.
Yeah, they had coaching programs, right? Not only the Sherman Phoenix also garnered the interest of several other business leaders, right? So I forget his name. I think his name's Jackens who runs Palermo. And they came together with the pizza business there, Sauce and Spice. And not only did they, and I'm going from memory, so if some of these details aren't specifically, I'm a risk person, so I'm all about disclosures. I'm going from memory. So I believe that they donated the oven, and then they worked with the owner of Sauce and Spice, not only to create some recipes and things, but really understand how do you run a business. Outside of Sherman Phoenix in general, people who have ideas or are practitioners don't always have all the business coaching, right? Which is why organizations like WIBIC and other types of CFIBs exist to help people say, hey, you have this great idea, but how do you really run a business? So not only was this an investment in a community that is severely under invested in, but it's also creating wealth and equity with these entrepreneurs who have these brilliant business plans or business ideas, but maybe haven't received some of the same training. So it's sort of a comprehensive facility, and also then the layer on top of that, a services aspect. And even though it's been a couple of years, I think in fact, maybe 2 weeks from now, we'll be at the 2nd year anniversary of the opening. It's thriving. And some of these businesses, you know, they've not only renewed their leases, but they're growing. Their shipping is growing, and their territory expansion is fantastic.
Even now during COVID?
Mm-hmm. Now, some of them are experiencing some challenges, right? Especially in-person things, but they've also, I'll use the P word, they've also pivoted to change how they can reach their clients, right? I can use the example of Joanna Brooks, who owns Embody Yoga. She is a testament to how you can bring a business into a community that's so hungry for yoga. And yet you probably, if you had $1 for a yoga studio on the North Shore, you'd have more than just a couple dollars. But talk about, the Black community or the different underserved communities. It's not that there's not interest. There's this assumption that people aren't consuming or interested in it. And her business has done really well. She's changed to having a virtual aspect, which I hear from all my friends who I used to see in the studio is doing really well, which is a testament to just the ingenuity and the success of these business owners. And to me, it's like the Sherman Phoenix has been phenomenal. How do we continue to do this in other spaces?
So the reputation perhaps of, and I may be phrasing this wrong, I think you phrased it better earlier, is sort of socially responsible investing has been, oh, well, you're not going to get that's, you don't make money off of that. That's not a good way of doing it, things like that. What do you say to that, or what has been, as an expert in the area of investment?
Yeah, so the old school way of thinking, is sort of like, it's kind of the difference between the tension between shareholder value and what's now called stakeholder value. So shareholder value from a traditional investing standpoint is company A is going to make widget X or service Y, and then after you allocate capital to your employees, to your research and development, all the extra money goes back to the shareholders, right? And as corporations have evolved over time, it's really become a little bit more of a how can you squeeze out all of that profit and then return that all back to the shareholders, where you have CEOs making $20-30 million a year, and your lowest rank and file is still only making $7-8 an hour, right? And so this kind of thinking was that, oh, well, socially responsible investing is nice, but are windmills really going to do that much? Like, are you really going to put your money in windmills? Maybe you should put your money into oil and gas, because that's how most of the world consumes energy, and that's generated, right? And or like clean water or things like that. So it had this sort of kind of stigma around it. But now things have really, really shifted from a sense of responsibility and equity, and now you have CEOs like, Ken Frazier from Merck or Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan, and you wouldn't exactly think of a pharmaceutical company or a fancy New York bank to be the ones having these conversations around stakeholder value. But CEOs are being asked to step into a public-private type of arena in a way that, in my humble opinion, I think politicians have failed us in a lot of ways. And corporations aren't doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're looking for talent, and they're looking for ways to stay engaged in consumers who, by the way, are becoming more savvy. You even see things that are happening in the healthcare space. It hit your industry many years ago when people wanted more explanation for billable hours. And that was an evolution, right? It's hitting our industry too, for fee compression. And back in the day, you'd buy a bond and you had no idea how much you were paying in commission for a bond. And now it's all clearly laid out. So before I get too tangential and long-winded, things have shifted so much. And so now, thinking about like Tom's shoes, right? You buy a pair of shoes and a person in need gets another pair of shoes. Traditional companies are having to think and recalibrate their approach to investing because consumers are demanding it. And the next generation, and this is nothing against, generations prior, but they've grown up in a different world where they've had exposure to things. And now, while millennials might want more, they're still a little complacent when it comes to change. Gen Z won't even touch a company if they think it doesn't have their values. I talk to next generation high net worth investors, and these aren't people that are trying to put a couple $1,000s together, or as my grandma always says, a couple wooden nickels. These are individuals who run and operate really successful businesses and have millions of dollars, and they won't touch certain types of companies unless it's been fully vetted or screened through for a handful of different things: how they treat their employees, what is the makeup of the board, what is the makeup of not only the C-suite, but going outside of the VP line to the director level. And, though that's more gender-based, that racial equity and sexual orientation, all of that is starting to come out. And so I'm seeing a shift in consumer demand, asking for more types of impact investing. And until that happens, an industry doesn't respond. But now the industry is sitting back and saying, oh, hey, wait a second. We have to catch up to what's being asked about. And now it has less of a bad rap and it's becoming more mainstream.
Mm-hmm. And this might be tangential, but it reminds me of back in early part of the spring when the protests first really were going after George Floyd's murder. And I flip on Amazon to watch TV, and here's Amazon saying Black Lives Matter. And I'm thinking, does he really care?
Yeah, I can't speak.
Or is he doing it because he has to? And so we were discussing that in my family, and it was like, come on, Jeff Bezos doesn't care. But then, as we were talking, it was, well, as long as he's saying he cares, that message then gets out to people who might be less aware or less caring about this. And they'll say, oh, Jeff Bezos cares, then it matters.
Right. And I don't think it's an or proposition. I think the journey of what started as diversity and then became inclusion, and now it's a sense of belonging, right? It's not only being asked to the dance, right? It's also getting to play the music and curate the guest list and throw the party. It's, whatever metaphor you want to use. I think that I think generally humans are driven by reactivity. It's quite rare when people are cutting edge or futuristic, because it's not proven to be successful, right? That's why the model buy low, sell high is good in theory, but people always sell at the bottom and buy back in at the high because we're creatures that have it. And so I think it's not an or proposition. I think whether or not Bezos cares, as you said, it's that he says he cares. Mm-hmm. And there could be people who are watching and saying, well, Amazon doesn't care. All they do is put people out of business. So they're the new behemoth, right? They're the Walmart of the 21st century. Bentonville, Arkansas is probably pretty happy about Amazon in some degree because the political heat's off them. But, I think that it's also a process in learning. I can speak to my company where I know the intention and the investment has been in this journey all along. It was the perfect marriage of a pandemic. So you're forced to sit with things in a way that you've never had to sit. I remember talking to Angie, my wife, in like April or May, I think it was. And I just said, I just have so much pent up energy. I'm just sitting in this house. All I can do is run. And she, I believe, said, I think you should run some more. But it's that marriage of having to sit with your thoughts and your feelings with what happened with George Floyd, because in all honesty, what happened to George Floyd has been happening for 400 years, right? If you do any kind of research on, everyone's like, but we freed the slaves, and, not to mention any lack of integration or labor or education planning, but you just recriminalize them in a different light, and you talk about, what happened in sentencing mandates and all of these things, right? And so George Floyd happens and we're all stuck at home and we have to think about it. And so we're forced to either get angrier or we educate ourselves. And that is what I think is fascinating. You see companies continue to stumble, like Starbucks. They did an awesome job a year ago shutting down for a day for an education process. And then somehow, a memo is released that went through multiple gates of compliance and attorneys, and they don't allow people to wear the t-shirt, right? And you're like, wait a second, that just doesn't make any sense to me. But you best believe Starbucks is going through a lot more training now, right? And so I think we're forced to respond, we're forced to care. You can see from the anger and the vehemence and the frustration and the hate that's spewed that it's definitely stirred up the opponents in ways I never thought I would see so blatantly and unapologetically public. But I do think, going back to the Baird example, it was a realization of, we've been doing this from an academic place of strategy, and we need to do this in a place of practicality and application, as in, this should have changed things 10 years ago. We're now playing catch up, and we need to put this front and center as a business case. And that's what I think is starting to change in these companies, because they realize we're missing out on tremendous talent. I don't remember where I read this, but it was a Black man had posted. He said, for all the racism and challenge he has faced in his life and the emotional tax that he pays on a daily basis, how it's taken away from being a better husband, a better father, coming up with more inventions, writing a different book. You think about that, and I think companies are finally starting to realize, one, they can't ignore it, and two, the depth and the pain of what they were ignoring is real.
And there's also, in addition to my legal background, I have a human resources background. There's lots of research about how diverse groups make better decisions. And so a diverse community within the workplace makes better decisions. We have if it's all right, we have a number of questions coming in. So I want to raise some of those. So one person, and you touched on this a little bit, but it would be great if you could expand on it a little more. Can you talk about social investment as compared to philanthropy? Are they the same? Are they different? How would you describe it?
It's a great question. And actually it goes back to a question you asked earlier, and my squirrel mentality forgot to answer it. But so social investments or kind of impact investing is probably the best way to describe it. How is it different than philanthropy? Philanthropy is a way for you to give money, and after you give that money, there's no more involvement, right? So there's a tax benefit, of course, right? If I write a check for $1,000, I get that deduction off of my income statement. But after I write that check, there's really not any involvement for me with whatever organization receives it. And I'm not saying that philanthropy is bad. I'm saying that there's room for both. And I truly believe that there's going to be involvement in the philanthropy space as people want to start to have, it's kind of like experiential, right? We always tease millennials and Gen Z of how they want all these experiences. Like, who needs a job when you could go, backpacking for a year and get to speak another language? It's kind of that same thinking of, you want to be engaged, you want to be involved. And philanthropy has its place, but I write a check and then my relationship with that experience is pretty much over. And that's not to say you don't stay engaged or you still don't go to events or you're not still involved. You might sit on boards, work on committees. But impact investing, or like the Sherman Phoenix, Angie and I are automatically more motivated to stay engaged with those businesses, because in essence, it goes back into this investment bucket. We're owners. We have a sense of pride in that. We're more engaged and incentivized to introduce it to other people and to talk to them about those things, right? Anytime you own a piece of something, it's the same thing of when you're a shareholder in a company you work for. You walk a little taller, you have a little bit of a longer stride, you pick up garbage off the floor that you might ignore. If it's not your company, I hope you don't, because you should always pick up garbage. But there's just a different aspect. And so I truly believe that, Angie and I didn't put money into the Sherman Phoenix because we're trying to become wealthy fast. We put money into the Sherman Phoenix because we believe that every neighborhood that is underinvested in deserves a shot at bringing those ideas and an opportunity to highlight the talent that exists in that neighborhood. And it's so easy for people who don't spend time in those neighborhoods to just gloss over and not care. They get in their car and they head west, they get in their car and they head north, and they never pay attention. They don't break bread with people that live in different neighborhoods or come from different backgrounds. Back to your point about, cognitive, socioeconomic, educational differences, they're going to create more profit, because at the end of the day, you make money when you deliver a good or service that people want. And that's the essence of capitalism. People think capitalism is bad and that we need to go to socialism. And capitalism is just a way to organize the mechanics of an economy. It's not designed or structured to make sure that everyone has access to the pond, learns how to fish, and then can create a life out of providing fish for their family and or business community. And so that, to me, we fully expect an investment return from our investment, and we believe that we'll continue to get that, because again, we don't think of this as charity. We think of this as ingenious humans who finally got the attention and the money that frankly they deserved years ago.
So you touched on something. I know we've talked about this at other times. So I think you mentioned you've moved further and further west. And so why do you care about what happens in the Sherman Park neighborhood? Why? I mean, you can easily drive from your house, zip right through on the freeway, get to downtown, never go near there. What does it matter to you?
Yes, I think door to door, it's like 4 or 5 different streets that I have to take to go from home to work. And, why is it important to me? There's a sense that there's this individualism, the kind of individualistic thinking that Americans pride themselves on. It's that whole, the cliche bootstraps mentality, right? And I do a lot of reading, a lot of kind of economic research, and it's fascinating. Companies aren't successful without the people they employ to do the jobs, and the people they employ live in a variety of different neighborhoods. And the success of that company, is a result of the stability in housing, the stability in education, the stability in crime reduction, and all of those things. And I don't want to live in a bifurcated world where there is an unbelievable amount of wealth concentration and a deprivation of resources. And so I don't care if I become an expat and I live in the south of Spain. I'm always going to care about the community where I generated success and where I've become who I am today. Not only the organizations and the people that have brought me along, but also the strangers. You know, I am a sum of parts, and it's conversations and it's things and it's, you know, the firefighters and the school teachers and the police and all the people that make a municipality successful, Department of Public Works, whatever it is. It's like we all need to take a major social studies lesson again, including executives, to realize that, you know, if we want to be innovative, if we want to be successful, we have to start paying attention to the neighborhoods that are underserved. So the Sherman Phoenix, you know, happened in the Sherman Park neighborhood. And that just, you know, that happened to be a neighborhood, but I care about Century City. I care about, you know, the Amani neighborhood. I care about Bronzeville. I care about all these different areas, because what is Milwaukee if we're not putting money and investing it? You know, all these people say, well, Milwaukee, you know, sucks all the money out of the state. No, you know what? You'd never have a new stoplight in Palmyra if you didn't have Milwaukee. So the more successful we make Milwaukee, the better off the state's going to be. That's why I care. It doesn't matter where I live.
Okay. All right. I'm looking, sorry. Looking for other questions that have come in. What has been your biggest positive surprise working with the Sherman Phoenix group, and what's been the biggest disappointment?
The biggest surprise is how well the business owners have handled this pandemic. Truly, you know, I don't know the exact statistics, but they're pretty high. The first year of a business, you know, they don't make it, right? And not only are these companies surviving, but they are finding different ways to be successful. It's such a testament to, you know, if you give people the resources they need, you know, what they can do. And that's just been awesome. It's been 2 years. It's lost its sexiness, right? Everybody showed up for the opening. I mean, the parking lot and the 3-block radius was a disaster. And you had all the who's who in the Business Journal photo slide. And a year later, you know, I was talking to the mayor of Milwaukee about this, and we looked around and there was a fraction of the individuals there for the year anniversary. But regardless of what street traffic or people looking for a photo opportunity are present or not, it's done unbelievably well, and it continues to do well. And that is an example of this being an economic vehicle for these business owners. So that's been, you know, the thing that we absolutely love, and the surprise around it. And the surprise is not nearly about the neighborhood or the level of talent. It's just that you even see businesses go in and out of the Milwaukee public market, and that couldn't be in a more, you know, trendy neighborhood, but you still see businesses fail. And so that level of success has been really awesome to see. Disappointment, you know, I guess maybe I touched on that in the surprise aspect, just how fleeting people's attention spans are. You know, if you really want to make a change, you need to have time and patience with your investment. And that, you know, people tend to come and go on different things. But if you got the attention of individuals and they really spent time putting their money where their ideas are, and coaching and supporting, I think that's what has been a little bit disappointing. People I know, people that are my friends who used to go there a lot, that dwindles down. You know, now they're like, oh, it's out of my way. I'm not going to go support Funky Fresh anymore, even though they're the world's best spring rolls. And I'm like, okay, well, if you still paid attention, you'd realize you don't even have to go there, because Truman McGee is a baller, and now they'll ship them to your door. You know, it's always just like
that.
Yeah, it's like paying attention to those things. I think that's been a little disappointing, is seeing sort of the public interest dwindle because it's no longer in vogue and people are on to the next thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How would you think that that Wauwatosa could better support and attract Black and Brown business owners?
I would ask Black and Brown business owners. I don't claim to be an expert in that space. One thing that I've learned is that white people tend to come up with what they believe are the solutions and the answers to problems that, though they've had a hand in creating and reinforcing, they've never paused to ask the individuals that are most negatively impacted by those challenges and problems. So if I were a Wauwatosa resident or a part of a group that's interested in attracting more investment of Black and brown business owners, I would go to them and ask them, what do you need? You know, you need a customer base, so you need a commitment of support. You need funding. You need, you know, loan support and funding in that regard. And whoever's in charge of your economic development, working with your political leaders to say, this is something we're really interested in. And as a citizen and a taxpayer of this community, I'd like to know, you know, what are you doing about creating this diversity? Because Wauwatosa has some cultural diversity present. I mean, think about your school system and all the individuals that are going to school in the different school systems and things of that nature. And how many people move there and say, I feel like an other. Like, you change that by asking them, what do you need? So I would encourage that research and conversation to find the answers to that outside of just the typical funding, support, and different mechanisms of that nature.
Yeah, excellent answer. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions in the chat box. Somebody wrote, I love what you're saying about, this goes back a little bit, about the generational differences in which companies they choose to support based on values. I'm wondering if there are simple ways to educate businesses, government officials, etc., about that, and what do you think?
Well, it's a big group. It's a big group that you're trying to get the attention of. You know, how do you educate businesses? I mean, you vote with your money. You vote with your actual ballot. You get the attention of your leaders through conversation, communication. Larger numbers speak volumes. There's no shortage of conversation taking place in the Tosa community right now. If ever there's a time to capture opportunity, it's in times of disruption and frustration and challenge. You know, I think, again, going back to your point, there's a level of self-preservation that's present in any entity, whether that's a political, a person who has run and occupying political office, or whether that's someone who owns and operates a business. You educate them by asking for what you want and what's missing, you know. And I think at the end of the day, you can take as many YWCA classes, you can read as many books, you know, The Color of Law, you know, How to Be an Anti-Racist, all the different, you can read all of the information. But this journey is really something that's internal. It's something that has to be personal. Until your friends, the people within your top 10, you know, your text thread, have some diversity outside of who you are and your background and your way of life and your thinking, things don't really become that personal. And so for a lot of people, kind of that homogenous nature is very natural. We tend to cling to people that we're like or occupy those kinds of spaces. And so finding different ways to introduce the intersection of different ways of thinking or different types of business owners, you have to educate people on what you want, and then you have to ask for it. And sometimes they're just not going to pay attention. You know, you're looking at that. There's a lot of tension, you know, in your community right now with people who hold positions of political office, whether appointed or elected. And, you know, until the majority says we want something different, things tend to stay the same. So by having a personal conversation where the person on the receiving end who doesn't know whether, you know, doesn't know they need to receive something, you make it personal and you make it relatable and you have a conversation. People often ask me when I first started, so I just have to turn my light back on.
Sure. Sorry, we're keeping you a bit late.
No, that's fine. when I first started at a financial services firm, and they said, you're in the belly of the whale. Companies like Baird, and nothing against Baird personally, just financial services in general, whether it's JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, whatever, you're structured to help affluent people stay affluent and not help, people like you and me, build wealth. And I said, that may be true. That may be the perception. But if I want to get more people who don't have shoes faster, then I need to go work at the company who makes the shoes, build relationships with the executives at that company, and then influence how we're bringing our services to market and educate them that maybe there are other audiences besides the only demographic we've been marketing this to. And so if you find ways, and that doesn't happen overnight, you have to have patience, but you also have to have it come from a place of authenticity. And then people are compelled to listen if you've earned their trust. And that's really hard when you fundamentally disagree with somebody else's position. I've gotten into to really deep, challenging discussions with family members, people that I love, people that I would still go bail out of jail if they got into trouble. And I love using that because I come from like such a relatively boring family that probably would find themselves in jail. But you care about them tremendously. And even though you vehemently disagree with everything they stand by, I'm going to continue to have some of those conversations because in time, at the right moment, I might just be able to change their mind.
True. Let's see.
I see one question about they rely on their financial advisor.
Yep.
On retirement funds, and that's kind of a layup. There's all sorts of, if you just even use a search engine, I'm trying not to use the word Google as a verb. If you use a search engine, this is my own personal antitrust activity, and you just put in impact investing or socially responsible funds, there are all sorts of opportunities and avenues for that. Your advisor may or may not like the question. Advisors tend to be a little bit traditional. They tend to be a little bit older. They tend to be a little bit male, and they're stuck in their ways. And a lot has changed in the business, and that's not the fault of the advisor. It's just there's a lot out there. There's over 6,000 different mutual funds. There's even more ETFs. There's all sorts of publicly traded companies. So just doing a little research on your own about the different things that are available, and then positioning a question as, I'd like to learn more about this. That's a really super easy one. And I think, again, it's become more mainstream. So I'm pretty sure your advisor would welcome that question. And frankly, most of our clients don't ever want to talk about the investments. So they'd probably be really excited that now you're asking them some questions about the mechanics of the portfolio.
All right. Sorry, my eyesight is not great by the end of the day.
Right.
Are you familiar with Fund Milwaukee and its family and friends investment strategy? Not something I'm familiar with.
I'm not terribly familiar with them. I know that Julie Kaufman, who is one of the founders of the Sherman Phoenix, is involved with them. If you follow her on Twitter, she's always figuring out ways to get more money to people, business owners who need it. So I don't know a ton about them other than it's a way to put your money to work. I think the best way it was described to me once was sort of like the United way of investing, kind of the matchmaker of sorts, but I don't know enough to speak to it.
Okay. Then the next one, in a city as segregated as Milwaukee, Sherman Phoenix opens and draws people from all around the area to go into a new neighborhood. As an investor in Sherman Phoenix, is this outside of the neighborhood support vital? And how do you suggest maintaining that kind of broader support? Does it need to be part of a marketing plan, or is it an issue of people making personal awareness of the value to increase the scope of what they consider a neighborhood?
If you're looking at neighborhoods who have been severely underfunded or underinvested in, it is going to require the support and attention and attendance from people outside of the neighborhood just because in order to scale, right? But I would also say that you better be close to the individuals within the neighborhood and have the support of that neighborhood, where you oftentimes you'll see people converge on a neighborhood and say, well, this is what's best for this area. And the people who live there are like, nobody asked me. No, nobody talked to me about this plan. So I do think that it's necessary. Just a really simple analogy. Mayfair Mall does not draw shoppers from only Wauwatosa. It draws consumers from all over the state, and that's the same for a lot of different businesses. And so anytime you're going to create something on that kind of scale and make it marketable and appeal and attractive, you're going to need to draw that kind of attention. And I do think there's a formal marketing plan. I do think that there's ways we can be more positive about things, especially to neighborhoods outside of Milwaukee proper. There's so much ignorance when it comes to neighborhoods within the city and what people want. And there's all these assumptions that go into it, and no one ever talks to the actual people who live there. So I do believe that that's important. I do think it's vital. And there's a personal aspect, and then there's definitely a more formalized business and marketing plan.
Yeah. And you've mentioned that a couple of times, the importance, and I really like that, of actually talking to the people who are relevant to the conversation, the people in the neighborhood, or when talking about how do we recruit more diverse businesses here, talking to people who might be bringing it in. Because I guess the examples that I hear sometimes isn't really business related, but comes when you hear Western or non-Muslim people declaring what Muslim women need to, as far as, women's rights, and without ever talking to Muslim women and saying, oh, well, if they would just get rid of the hijabi, well, I know many very progressive, very, very feminist Muslim women who would be like, yeah, no.
Yeah, there's a cartoon, and I saw it many years ago, and it was a side by side. It was a woman in full Muslim attire, and then a woman in a bikini, and the thought bubble was identical, right? Like, what an oppressed society,
right?
And it was like so illuminating, right, to that whole thing of like what you think you need to prescribe to someone to make it better for them, and just how often you are so far off the path of what is required. So sorry to distract you with that.
No, that's exactly head on. So I think we'll do, because we got started late, so we're going a little past 8. So one more question, well, really 2, because I have one and there's one more in here, and then we'll wrap up. So so the next question, have you and your wife or your colleagues ever been involved in a project where many folks joined together to donate money, each to donate and invest in one cause or business? And what do you think about that kind of investment?
I think essentially that's sort of like self-directed private equity, right? I mean, it's kind of like a group of people saying, or like the women's organization, the Impact 100, where they, the women together, they all, I think it's $1,000, and then they grant the money, right? It's just the same kind of thing. So let's say that there's a business idea and you put all your money together and you do that. I think that kind of investing is great. I will say, because of my job and and loving disclosures, if you're going to do something like that, I strongly encourage you to invest the kind of money that you're okay if you don't necessarily hang on to it, because there aren't a lot of rules or regulations around how those businesses run or operate. Now, I'm not making the assumption that you would put money to work in a business that hasn't been vetted or someone that you don't trust. But when it comes to money and it comes to operating a business and lending your money to somebody, there are boundaries and there are rules in place. My wife and I have joined other couples and individuals and put our money into different investment vehicles. And we recognize that our role as investor is not to run the business or to constantly micromanage or ask certain questions. There's a difference between an awareness, but at the end of the day, when you're an investor, it's very similar to putting money into any kind of venture that's a startup or a small business. You have to be prepared for losses. It's the same with a stock, right? You could have bought GE stock in the high 20s and then watch that completely unfold in 2018. And I think at the low, it was like $6, so there's risk in any investment, even the highly regulated worlds of like the SEC. So when you do something like that, just have an awareness that, there is risk involved. And two, make sure there's some pretty strong boundaries in place, what your role is, what your responsibility is, and with that other group of individuals. But I think, the fact that we're having this conversation, I'd love to go to more dinner parties and have conversations with people and talk about money and talk about investing and talk about ways that we can create a stronger and more vibrant economy, again, in these neighborhoods filled with brilliant humans who have not been given the time, attention, and resources that they need. But instead we talk about all sorts of other things, and there's nothing wrong with the weather or sports or what have you. But if you just were a fly on the wall and attended some of the most prestigious philanthropic events where people who have tons and tons of money are dropping thousands of dollars, and almost none of these conversations are around how to invest their money into an economic engine that generates growth, revenue, and wealth creation in these neighborhoods that so desperately need it. And it's been taken from them for decades.
Okay, then just my last, this comes from a headline I saw today, so I haven't read the details. So I'm just wondering if you had heard about it and what your thoughts. I saw something about NML is pledging, gosh, now I don't even remember, a large amount of money.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't remember the amount, but it was big, to support startups for Black and brown people. And I was wondering if you heard about that and if you had read or anything and what your thoughts are.
I think it's brilliant. And Northwestern Mutual continues to step up to the plate in a variety of ways, not only after their market research. They could have built that tower in 100 different cities, but they put it here. And in that process, if you pay attention to how they selected their contractors and different people who participated in that process, right? The Bucks tried to do the same thing. And investing in startups and businesses, Milwaukee in general as a region is underfunded. We need to take more risk. We have to start creating more avenues of funding ideas, and we can't be stuck in sort of the industrial blue collar residue that exists. And you can be proud of that because laborers are a huge component of this industry. But as things evolve and change, we have to really challenge ourselves to think bigger and more creatively. And Northwestern Mutual does that in a big way. Every company has their own portfolio of investments, right? And so as you start to think about making your money work and grow, you have to move beyond the traditional investment firms and groups that tend to be all white, that tend to be mostly male, and start to go into these other areas. And again, not because it's this sense of benevolence or charity, but because there are brilliant humans coming up with all these fascinating ideas, and we have not taken the time or attention to see what's happening and what can be made possible. And frankly, I think because that's the challenges of racism and categorization on how we have historically defined Black and brown people in the white community. And it has to change. It has to change. We will not be the country that we are so proud of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if we don't start paying attention to citizens and individuals who aren't experiencing the same benefits that we are. So I love what NM is doing. I know, Baird continues to look at different things like that. Other companies, Rockwell, there's all sorts of companies that are looking into this space, because until we put money where we want to see change happen, you're not going to reap the rewards of the benefit of a dividend if there's not an initial investment of principal.
Before we finish off, I would like to know if anybody who's watching would want to contact you as a financial advisor to discuss their own potential. How would they do that?
We have a team website. You can Google the Drossner Phillips Ristau group, or you can go on the Baird website and look at that. We run a very tight-knit and culturally inclusive practice. We are not all things to everyone. We work with individuals who pride themselves on being disciplined and following a financial plan and strategy. We love helping people. We definitely work with a lot of first-generation wealth creation individuals, and it's an awesome business. I wasn't prepared for you to ask this question, so you can see me very grateful, and also if any conversation, and if we're not the right fit, we're more than happy to make introductions or come with recommendations on what makes sense for people as well. I think that consumers in general aren't really aware of what it's like to work with a high quality advisor and what are the kinds of services they should expect. It's another area. It's another project in the future that I want to be involved in. So if we're not the right fit, we're always happy to help however we can.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is put that link in when we post this later. So if people are looking for a financial advisor and think that you might be a good fit, they have a way of reaching out, if that's all right.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rebecca.
Oh, of course. Just want to say, so please thank me. Thank you.
Thank you. I got that one right. More laugh,
Please.
please.
One day. Please join me in thanking Emily.
There we go.
We really appreciate you sharing your experience and insights with us. Thanks also to you, our Facebook audience, for your time, as well as for your comments and engaging questions. We hope you found this presentation enlightening and inspiring. A special thank you to our generous friends at Bostic, whose support makes the entire Tosa Talks series possible. This month, we focused on themes of local business development, growth, and community impact through racial and social justice lens. Plan on joining Tosa Together for our final November Tosa Talks, postponed to December 3rd because of the Thanksgiving holiday. That night, our guest will be Corey Jo Biddle, Executive Director of Fuel Milwaukee, who will discuss, among other things, MMAC's Making Milwaukee a Region of Choice for Diverse Talent, an initiative which seeks to increase the numbers of African American and Latino Hispanic professionals in leadership roles. Please reach out to Tosa Together anytime through our Facebook page, our website, or by emailing us at tosatogether@gmail.com. This is Rebecca Salauda from Tosa Together, and it has been my pleasure to be here with Emily Phillips, as well as with all of you. Thanks for being a part of Tosa Talks and our mutual effort to build a diverse, thriving community. Good night, everyone.